Listen up. There's no more excuses. We're empowering those who want the hustle by exposing the status quo.
The days of ordinary are over.
It's time to crush mediocrity and start discovering your greatest potential.
Welcome to the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation.
Welcome back to another episode of the Hustle Nation podcast. Today, we're going to talk about communication, a topic that probably gets discussed a lot. But so often, I find most of the issues we have in the workplace and in leadership come back to communication in some way, shape, or form. We talk about misunderstanding, miscommunication. We talk about listening. But where we're going to go today, Dustin, is talking about charisma versus clarity. And we'll kind of wrap in all the different communication things you've thought of when you think of this topic. But Dustin, kick us off.
So what I've seen, I see it so often, right? To your point, communication is, I don't want to say it's the root of all evil because that makes it seem really bad, but it does seem like so many problems in work and in life really just come down to communication. There's lots of different ways to think about this, but I think, one of the kind of light bulbs that have gone on in my head certainly is this kind of balance between there's almost two different types of communicators. And, one has more charisma on one side, and then on the other side, it's more about clarity. And so what I mean by each of that, right, is you might have a leader that is crystal clear in their communication, right? This is what the message is. It's on point. It's consistent every time. And this is what it is. And there's a lot of value in that, right? Because as teams and things like that, if you don't have clarity and consistency of message, it's really easy to get confusion and mass chaos, right? And so there's a lot of value there. However, what it oftentimes might be missing is kind of the charismatic energy, right? Like how do you actually get people to not just hear and understand the message, but understand the why and like get behind it, right? For whatever reason. On the other side, you have these communicators that they're more charismatic, right? So they when they just speak about things, they just have a little bit more energy and some more excitement around it, which is good for certain things, but their clarity and consistency of message isn't consistent, right? It's not consistent and it's not clear. And so you get people that are like, oh, this person is energetic and all that sort of stuff. But I walk out of the room and I don't even really know what was even the message, what was the point. And what I actually think is interesting is I actually think both are right and both are wrong, right? It's actually, how do we get to the middle and create energy around our communication, right? And it's not always sunshine and rainbows, right? I mean, sometimes as a leader, the communication isn't positive news, right? But it can, even negative news can have, charisma, relationship, connection, right? Like feeling into it. And so how do we get, communicators that are more clear, consistent, nailing the points? How do we get them to better communicate the why and the feeling and the direction of where we're going? On the flip side, how do we get those that are more about the feeling and the message and the connection? And how do we get them to get clearer and more consistent in their messaging? And so just one thing that I'll point out to each side, and then we can kind of talk about it. So what I think a lot of times on the clarity side, right? Those communicators, if you're a communicator that you're like, look, I'm very clear, I'm bullet pointed, I'm very clear, I'm very consistent. I can hit the same message over and over and over again. The challenge I would give to that individual is saying, what is actually the why? Like how are you thinking through what is the philosophy or the why or the vision of that communication? Because if you can connect at that level, it's not so clinical. It becomes, more of, not necessarily even always emotional, but more emotional, more human, more connection, right? And then on the more charismatic side, to be blunt, it's write down your bullet points and hit on them consistently. Like because what I've seen is those that are more clear and consistent, whether written down or not, they have bullet points. It might even be in their head, but it's like they're just going straight down the list of these are the things that I need to hit. The charismatic side, it's just like, oh, well, how am I kind of feeling today? Right. And I'm reading body language and eyes, and I'm kind of just going with the flow. Well, how do you hit those bullet points? But then again, use that energy, use that charisma. And so it's almost like either side, if they can just think through that one change, that one add, I think they come more to the middle and become much more effective communicators.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point, Dustin. The other side of this that I want to bring up is listening. And so often to have good communication, it requires a conversation with two or multiple people. And I saw this quote, and it goes, leaders who don't listen will eventually be surrounded by people who have nothing to say. And there is kind of it's a whole nother conversation to add on to the one we're already having. But I think about a good conversation and good listening does require active listening, which now we're talking about emotional intelligence. We're talking about follow-up questions. And that is something that's really important as well, because what is a productive conversation? It is walking away with mutual understanding of something, whether that be an agreement or understanding, potato, potato. But I think we also have to talk about the listening side of a conversation as well, because we need to be engaged and people need to understand the message. So it is kind of incumbent that the other person is actively engaged in the conversation.
And so, I mean, the best communicators are the best at listening, right? And whether you're doing a one to many communication, right? That's less dialogue, but the listening happens beforehand, right? When it's more one to one or one to a few, right? Listening is so critical, and there's a difference between listening to respond versus listening with genuine curiosity. And I think a lot of times what our leaders fall down is they do listen, right? They do ask some questions and they do listen to the response, but their immediate reaction is, how am I going to respond to that, as opposed to really trying to understand it at its core? Because the best communicators, they understand people's feelings, perceptions, motivations, at the core. And because they do, it's just that much easier to connect, right? And to hit on the things that matter to that individual. If you're not listening, if you're not asking questions, you're not going to get that. And your quote is insanely accurate, right? Like you see it all the time where people will say like, well, I don't say anything anymore because I know nothing's going to happen, right? Well, what does that mean? Well, what it actually means is, one, is somebody listening? And sometimes people even are listening, but what is the communication loop back, right? Like, right. As an example, I think in corporate culture today, right? Like, there's a lot of people that talk about, how do I gain more feedback, right? And clearly any organization that would say, I don't want more feedback, that would be insane, right? However, I do also think I've seen some organizations that are more on the fringe where they're passionate about feedback, but they ask for so much feedback, they can't actually act on it. And so people think that it's going to increase feedback in a feedback loop, but it actually kills it slowly, because, to your point, people stop saying anything because they're just like, well, I don't think anything's going to happen with it anyway, right? I'll use myself. So this was, years ago in our organization. This is probably, I don't know, man, it's 25 years ago probably now. Well, no, it wouldn't have been 25. It would have been 20 years ago. Because it was right after I started here. We had a suggestion box, the old suggestion box where people would write a note and they'd put it in there. And I'll never forget it, because I remember starting, they're like, oh, there's our suggestion box. I'm like, okay, great. Like, every once in a while you'd see a few people putting it in, and like, I was relatively new, so I didn't see a lot of people putting it in, but it was kind of once in a while, and it was kind of a small box. And so I was like, all right, well, maybe I should put a few things in there, right? So I put a few things in there, and a month goes by, 2 months goes by, and all of a sudden I'm like, I just asked the question. I'm like, what happens with the suggestion box? nobody knew. Like literally, there was no one ever checked it. No one ever looked at it. So I actually went, I just went and I opened it up. I mean, there were things from 5 years earlier, and it was because it was just this box that somebody had created at some point. I don't even know who first put it out there, but there was nothing around it. There was no feedback loop. And so you just think about like, how many ideas were in there that somebody was really excited about for whatever reason, felt like putting in the suggestion box was the best way to get it done. And then there's no feedback. Now, today's environment, maybe somebody doesn't put it in a box, but we have like quote unquote suggestion boxes just in a different form now, right? Like we have, email inboxes, right? Or surveys or, things like that, or round tables or whatever. And again, all of those are good things. But I think one of the challenges as you talk about, like, how do we communicate better? How do we listen better? To your point, it's a full circle thing, right? To be better communicators, you have to better listen. To listen, you have to be better, communicators, all that sort of stuff. It all starts with, if you're going to ask for feedback, listen with intent to actually understand. And then it doesn't mean you have to act on all of it, but just respond. And if you're going to act on or not act on, just let people know.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'll introduce another subtopic here, which is so often in communication, specifically via text or email, non-in-person forms of communication, things do get taken out of context. And it's happened to me many times, even in recent history. So sometimes I look at who am I communicating with and what is important. I know specific clients like long, detailed reports, like big explanations. And I know some I can use jargon with, and some I can't. Some I can crack a joke with, and others might find that offensive. And so, knowing your audience and making sure the context is appropriate, whether that be length, whether that be asking clarifying questions, which is a whole nother topic. But oftentimes, whether it's through written communication or in person, I have found more and more with age, it is asking, so if I understand correctly, you don't like X initiative because how it may negatively impact your job. Is that correct? Or this is what I'm gathering. Or I'll just say things like, help me understand the issue with this. And that's when we start to introduce new issues, which could be personal, could be professional, could be fears, could be interests. And so I think the more times we can ask clarifying questions, the more we can understand. And like you said, seek to understand before responding, the more I can then have a response that is appropriate for the context. So if you want to be a good leader, you have to be a good communicator. And if you don't ask good questions, it is really hard to say, okay, now I believe I understand. Now we can formulate a solution. And then one of the things I always try to do now more than ever is a recap of the conversation, what I'm going to do, maybe what you're going to do if you owe me something and I owe you something. And that to me is part of what makes up the bones of a productive conversation. Success is a whole nother thought, but productive is what you want your conversations and your communication to be, whether that's, again, written or in person. What's up, listeners? I just wanted to say thank you for being a part of the Hustle Nation community. We are absolutely thrilled and honored that you listen to our show. I wanted to take a break to share a special resource with you. I'm talking about our 2020 Vision Guide. This is a pivotal tool we use in our workshops where participants typically invest thousands of dollars for transformative experiences. Imagine having a crystal clear, actionable roadmap to not just meet, but exceed your personal and professional goals. That's the power of the 2020 Vision Guide. And here's the best part. We're offering it to you for free. This is your chance to leverage a tool that has propelled hundreds of people achieve unparalleled success. Visit our website now. I'm including the URL in the show notes below, where you can download our guide and start your journey toward clarity and achievement. Don't wait. It's time to create the life you deserve today. Now back to the show.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I think a lot of times as people are going into a conversation, right? And there are casual conversations where you're not going to think through this, but conversations that matter, right? To just think through what is the goal of the conversation. And what I mean by that is not necessarily what is the exact outcome, because I think sometimes people jump to that. Then it becomes manipulative, right? Versus if you think of the outcome. So, comparison I often use, right, is if you're going on a first date with somebody, right? What is the goal? The goal actually isn't to get a second date, right? The goal is to actually figure out, do you and the other person want to go on a second date, right?
Yeah.
And how do you do that? Well, you actually just have to engage, and you have to ask questions, and you have to, and so if you think about that lens with like any communication you have with any other human being, it's like, what do I want the outcome to be? Like, is the goal of this conversation for me to persuade this person to do X? That might be the goal, right? Okay, well, then how am I going to do that, right? Like, what's important to them? How do I align with what we need them to do with what they want to do and are capable of doing and things like that, right? Like, but it changes your thinking a little bit versus I think a lot of times people just engage in these tough conversations and just, to your point, they don't have bones to it. They don't have a framework to it. They just want to, let's just start talking. But if you, to your point, if you lead with questions, you lead with genuine curiosity, that tends to never not work. And so that's kind of the bones of it. But if you also just think about like, what am I actually trying to accomplish with this conversation? Is it, I just am looking to seek feedback? Is it, I'm looking to build a relationship? Is it, I'm looking to get insight on this strategic initiative, right? Is it, whatever the goal is, just to be thinking through just that 3 extra seconds. What's the goal of this conversation? It's crazy on how much more clarity you have.
That's a great question. And I think probably something a lot of us forget about is going into it with, what are we trying to accomplish here? That may not be a question you can ask in all types of communication and all conversations, but often in the workplace, that is something that you can and should lead with. The other thing I think we forget about a lot here is body language. And boy, I mean, it could be as simple and elementary as the way we sit in our chair at a meeting. We're tired, we're exhausted. Maybe we had something going on at home that kept us up, and we're slouching or looking at our phone. That just tells everybody, whether you say it or not, that you don't want to be there, or that you have a bad attitude, or something else is going on. And you'd hate for your body language to speak for you, even if that's not the true situation, but it does. And so you go back to the classic example of a date. If someone is leaning in and they're looking at you and they're making eye contact, that's a pretty good nonverbal sign that it's going well. And I think there are times when we can take body language into consideration, whether it be a conversation, an evaluation, a discovery call, where we can get a pretty good feeling if someone wants to be there or how they're feeling. And a lot of times I can use that as a cue to ask different questions, maybe to get them to open up, maybe to allude to something bigger is going on. And I just think that's another one in person that probably doesn't get discussed enough.
Yeah, I mean, it can be a hindrance or a tool, right? So, like I talk about in our organization, like with a lot of the, Zoom calls and Teams calls and things like that, right? Like, you got to have your camera on. Why do you got to have your camera on? Because it gives us a little bit more of that communication. We know so much communication is nonverbal, but you're exactly right. And as leaders, what are a few things that most people do that you can do differently, right? So this doesn't, now it's your cell phone, but like years ago, it used to always be your office phone, and I would have people in my office, and my phone would be blowing up. And what does everyone do when your phone rings? Everyone, even if you're in dialogue, they look at their phone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you then look at your phone, what does that signal to the person you're having the dialogue with? Of like, oh, I'm just checking to see if something is more important in the conversation that we're having, right? And unless you have an emergent situation there is likely nothing on that phone call that should take priority in that. I mean, if you're willing to take the time to engage in that dialogue with that individual, engage in the dialogue with the individual. And again, now I think it can be even worse because now it's cell phones, right? Like we all get notifications from everything, right? From cell phones to our watches to our, like all the things, right? And what happened? Like I'll use the watch as an example. A lot of people with like an Apple Watch, they get a notification. What do? They look at their watch. And that's a really interesting one because now it actually means two bad things, right? It used to mean I'm looking at the time to say like, Jesus, how long is this going to take? Now it actually means one of two things, both of which is bad. Either that
Great
or
point.
two, oh, what message did I get? I'm not paying attention to you for a second. Just keep going. I'll catch up, right? And to your point, it's small little things like that, but that level of that's just body language, right? That's listening with intent. That's all those things. It makes a huge difference because no matter what you said before or after that, you said everything you needed to say in that one moment.
That's true. That's a really gold nugget there, Dustin. The other thing that I keep thinking about too is clear versus concise. So you mentioned before having clarity, but are they the same? You could argue. Are they different? You could argue that as well.
Mhm.
I go back to marketing. And being someone who's been around marketing for a long time, the most impactful, influential messages in marketing are the ones that are typically short or very short. It's almost always the fewest amount of words are the ones that make the biggest impact. And the biggest words are the ones where like, huh? Think about politicians. So often they will leave you with a word salad, scratching your head thinking, you just used a lot of big words without really saying anything at all.
Mhm.
And that is where I think people get really frustrated is when you have a leader or when you're just in a conference call and someone says the same things 3 or 4 times without really saying a lot of anything. And it's like, how many different ways can you say the same thing and just continually talk and talk and talk? And that is a really good way to get people annoyed. And you can almost fall out of favoritism as a leader where it's like, I love my leader, I love my boss, but I just really do not look forward to talking with him or her because of the time that they consume. And for most of us, time is the most scarce resource. We talk a lot about that, Dustin.
Yep.
And so to me, I'm more about how can I provide a concise, clear answer that can protect our time at the same time.
You bet.
A lot of us will create meetings that are an hour or 30 minutes. They don't have to be. It's just, well, in case we need it, we're gonna have it.
Mhm.
But then that's how long it always lasts. Or
Yes.
if you're in my shoes, it's like somehow we always go over 5 minutes.
Mhm.
But if we were both on the same page of setting the expectation, hey, I've got a hard stop. I need to wrap up by 12:45, not 1:15 anymore. We could have a more productive conversation. We could give ourselves time back. And oh, by the way, like the team we're meeting with was elated that we were productive and we were respectful of your time. And I think if you can set that boundary, which we've talked about already today, boy, does it change the way you communicate because hey, we've got to talk about these 3 things. And if I can't tell you what I need to tell you and review what we need to review in this time frame, we are not going to have enough time. So for sake of time, I want to shelf that. Let's come back to it next week because X is more important. And so clarity is important, but being concise is just as important. I think not always, but more and more with your day-to-day stuff in the day-to-day typical in-person communication, Zoom calls, we have to remind ourselves that most people love it when we are
Mhm.
concise. It's just as a leader, even me, we get a little long-winded sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. It absolutely. I mean, why do you want to be clear and concise? You want to be clear and concise because then people actually remember what you talked about, right? And it actually increases clarity if you're more concise, right? And I think a lot of times as leaders, like, first of all, no one has ever left a conversation and said like, I wish they would have taken longer to get to the point, right? No one has ever said that. And now maybe I wish they would have given me more of the why, right? And so this goes back to the, those that are more clear and concise, are they giving the why, right? So there is an element of understanding that as well. But I think you're exactly right. The clear and concise element is so critical. And the way that you get that way too, by the way, is people are always like, well, how do you get more clear and more concise? You actually have to practice. Like
True.
I'll use an example. Like, at any time I'm speaking, lots of people will come up to me afterwards and be like, oh, that seemed natural to you. Right. Well, it actually isn't, like, and it doesn't mean that it's completely unnatural to me, but why does it come off as natural? One, because I've done a lot of it in my life, right? I've sucked for a very long time, and every time you suck, you get a little bit better, right? But two, if I'm even going to do a 10-minute talk internally with our team, I don't just prepare for that 3 minutes in advance, right? That's 10 minutes times, let's say 30 people. That's a very expensive 10 minutes. And so my immediate thought is, how do I make the most out of that 10 minutes? And so I'm going to spend, even on that low stakes, right? That's internal only. It's 10 minutes, right? It's probably not a huge contentious situation, right? Like, I'm probably going to spend 3 times that on just preparing for what I want to talk about, right? And what are my bullet points and because you're exactly right. That's how you get more concise, because it's, okay, I'm going to do this, then I'm going to talk about that, then I'm going to talk about that, then I'm going to reinforce it, then I'm going to be done.
You're almost better off giving yourself less time for meetings so that you can be more concise. Mm-hmm. And you can always book another meeting if you need it, but more times than not, people go into it, other people as well, thinking, well, we better stay on task. We better talk about the most important things, because that's ultimately all we want to do.
Yeah.
Is it fine to have like a nice little intro? How's your weekend? The weather, whatever. How's your kids? Yes, that's great. And most of us do that in a timely fashion, but it's the minutia in the middle that, we wind up in these rabbit holes and go off on tangents that are disrespectful of your time, mm-hmm. but also other people's time. And just as a leader, think about this for 1 second. Just imagine 10% of your calls, you saved 15 minutes. Maybe that's 50 calls, you saved 15 minutes. How much more shit are you going to get done in a year by saving that much time? I would argue a lot. And it probably takes a lot of stress off your plate. And if it adds productivity and removes stress, you probably feel better. You probably think better. You probably bring a better self home to your family.
Yes.
And I don't know how important that can be, because guess what? In this web of life, everything's all connected, whether you want to believe it or not.
Yes.
Final thoughts on communication, Dustin?
I think communication is a never ending thing, right? You can never learn more about it or enough about it, I should say. There's constantly different ways of thinking about it, but I think every time people think it's about something else, it's usually about communication. And so how are you going back and getting back to clear communication, concise communication, but with the why, with some charisma, right? With some energy behind it. That's how you become the best communicators.
Yeah, I think a big takeaway a lot of people should have from this episode is what you said about practicing. That stuck with me. Obviously, you and I have done a lot of public speaking. Practicing doesn't necessarily makes perfect, but it makes you comfortable. And when you're comfortable, when you're yourself, you tend to have a better message and you tend to resonate more with your audience, which is probably another topic we could have weaved in here, but that is important. Practice and plan. Plan the time you have for the conversation, for the discussion, for the presentation, whatever it is, and you will find it to be more effective and more productive. That's ultimately what communication is about. It's not going to be perfect. Never, rarely will ever be perfect, but it needs to just continually get better. And boy, is life easier when two people are on the same page. That was a fun episode. Thank you for tuning in to another one. Catch you on the flip side. Peace.
Thank you for being part of the Hustle Nation. If you're serious about raising the bar in your personal and professional life and willing to go all in on your success, head over to hustleleaders.com. Here you can get access to our Hustle Productivity ebook, attend our Hustle Masterclass, or challenge yourself to the 30-day Hustle Challenge. Pairing these tools and training with the Hustle Nation podcast will help you advance to a whole new level. Until next time, stay hungry and inspire those around you to hustle.